Cool. Well, thanks everybody for joining today. We're calling this series Fast Talk, and we've been doing it with different people throughout the industry. Talking to everybody that, from aftermarket companies, folks that are running trade shows and beyond. This one's called Editorial Without Experiences. So I wanted to kind of go around the room, introduce everybody. So we've got Larry Chen, Alexander Cheney, Brett Evans, Ted Gashu, and Bassem Wasif. So starting with you, Larry, just to give people an idea of kind of your day-to-day, what's your specialty and what do you do?
First of all, this is a pretty stacked panel. I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. But yeah, day to day, I take pictures. I do editorial things, follow racing, pretty much that.
All right. And Alexander?
Yes. So I kind of walk the line between lifestyle, luxury, automotive. I cover watches, I cover design and art. So to me, it's kind of the intermingling of everything that makes the most sense. So normally I travel primarily internationally. So getting to relearn my country whilst in COVID has been an interesting delight, let's call it. But yeah, my day-to-day when I'm at home is largely focusing on editorial and, like I said, weaving those together. And when I'm on the road, it's being on the road.
Cool. And Brett, I'd probably have everybody jump in if write for certain outlets, anything like that is helpful too.
Yeah, I work at motor1.com. I'm a senior editor there, and COVID's definitely affected my job just in terms of travel, but otherwise things have been pretty stable and pretty comfortable. Like Alexander, I've gotten a chance to really explore, Southern California a little bit more. I've gotten through a lot of San Diego County and Los Angeles County more than usual, and so that's kind of been fun and good opportunity to kind of like center a little bit. Definitely ready to get out and travel again though soon.
Cool. And Ted?
My name's Ted. In a past life, I would have been radically affected by COVID. Last year, I did 101 flights. This year, I have not, obviously. But my primary focus shifted from being the editor-in-chief of Petrolicious.com a couple of years ago, where I was traveling the world, going to every car event, photographing every car event, meeting everybody possible, networking for every story we wanted to do editorially. So now I check emails and manage a digital marketing strategy firm that produces books, that produces an Instagram account for Porsche called Type 7, that does digital strategy consulting for the tourism board of St. Moritz. So I couldn't have been luckier in the timing of my shift in career into a fully digital consultancy. My passion was what was really affected, which is much like Larry's, photographing cars and photographing events and meeting people and traveling and seeing the world. So the things that I really personally care about were affected, but I'm very lucky that my professional, let's say, remit is quite stable. So in that respect, I'm quite lucky.
And Bassem?
Alphabetical, always last. I'm an author, journalist, and marketing consultant. And like many of us here, a lot of my work before involved many trips to Europe and around the world throughout the month. Being at home has helped me recalibrate my workflow and everything that I do. I mean, I've always worked wherever I am, but I've sort of leaned a little bit more on the consulting side and still writing a lot about cars, but high-end luxury stuff, automotive, and the world that inhabits. So that's in a nutshell.
We're kind of going around the room. What have you been most active with from a journalistic perspective or photography since COVID hit, or has there been sort of an uptick in the last couple months? What's been most active?
Do we raise our hands or poke our eyes, or what do we?
Yeah,
what do you want?
go for it.
I've personally been shooting in LA a lot, and I've actually took advantage of the fact that the streets were empty for once, and I could actually shoot these cars during rush hour, during golden hour, at night, in the morning, midday. It's crazy. but it actually helped a lot to be able to shoot these places that I've always wanted to shoot and do a lot of these personal projects.
On that note, I got to say, for me, it's been fascinating because I've always had great roads in my backyard. Like Angeles Crest is 10 minutes away. And I've always traveled, we travel halfway around the world to drive all these great California roads, you know. So I've kind of rediscovered local experiences, Malibu, all the mountain roads around here, the high desert. And the manufacturers have recalibrated by sending a lot of cars and doing these sort of like tidy drop-offs where they disinfect the car, they leave it, they don't even, you know, face-to-face contact sometimes. And then they have press events where it's very isolated, it's kind of one-on-one, pardon the needy dog. Georgie says hi. It's just a different way of experiencing cars, you know. I mean, we're not flown over to the Nürburgring to drive anymore. We're kind of like left the keys in a sterile envelope and left to explore the car and then do these Zoom press conferences, which is a totally different experience. But you know, it recalibrates my experience with a vehicle when it's in such a personal environment, and I can have more freedom in terms of how I experience it, and oftentimes longer time with the car versus spending a half day swapping with another driver. I get to live with the car more, and it's kind of a revelation, really.
And kind of on that note, and I think this will open it up a little more, a little specific. You kind of touched on it, Bassem. How have companies and brands responded with activities, workarounds, and press loans? Are a great example. I know, you know, several of you, you know, get press cars on a pretty regular basis. How have brands done, you know, sort of pivoted there in that sense?
I can say one experience is the opposite of what you're expecting. The entire fleet of Porsche Great Britain, I was based in London for all of lockdown, sat for so long that when we finally went to pick up a press car the other day for a photo shoot, we went through 4 different cars because each one had like radical faults that we just couldn't drive them. So the press fleet had actually literally been sitting for the entirety of lockdown and nobody had been maintaining it. So wow. we ran into this. We were just trying to organize, and we work for Porsche. We're an agency that has a Porsche contract. So it's not like we're journalists. We were actually hired to do specific work, and they couldn't get us a 718, couldn't get us a Cayman, couldn't get us anything. So we ended up taking a Macan GTS that was the only car in the fleet that was working. It was a surreal experience, but totally unique to this scenario.
Wow.
Yeah, that is probably it sounds kind of like a one-off. I feel like a lot of the rest of us have probably had possibly better experiences with press vehicles because we have had more one-on-one time with each one, as Bassem said. And, you know, absent a lot of the rigmarole of getting to the airport and traveling and everything like that, I feel like I've never had more intimate access to cars than I do right now. Like, it's just much, much easier. Like, I'm very privileged that it's much easier to do my job in COVID-19 than it ever has been with actually getting like in-depth experience with these vehicles, which has kind of been nice. I feel bad for the fleet managers for all the balls that they have to juggle now, but for me, it's definitely been substantially easier to do my job.
It's been an interesting opportunity to see how manufacturers have enabled sort of more experiential interactions with the vehicle. Like Ferrari launched the F8 Spider by basically opening up a home in Malibu and having you show up, tell you where the keys are, drive the car, and then have it picked up from your home later. So you go, you live there for overnight, and you experience this car in this different environment and different roads and different things that you might, it's out of your sort of ordained procedure, but then in between car drop off and pickup, you can do whatever you want with it. So, it's this semi-structured sort of a little taste of just something different, which is, I think, really important too.
So I'm having the opposite experience because to me, the travel and international, because I come at it from a lifestyle perspective, Brett loves having this car and having this intimate access with it. For me, I need the different countries, the different places, because that becomes so much a part of my story and the way that I talk to my audience when it comes to auto, that I'm actually like, I can't drive PCH anymore. Like there's no part of PCH I haven't discovered. And living in Southern California and being a surfer, like I'd already known PCH. So I'm actually having the opposite, with the exception of Ferrari. I'm getting these cars and they're wonderful to have because, like Brett said, I am getting them for a week, which is really fun. But I don't have the compelling backdrop. I've already done Palm Springs. I've already done Angeles Crest. I've already done PCH. So I'm actually having to come up with, I just took the Land Rover Defender for 2 weeks through Utah to do a destination guide / road trip. And that was kind of my way of creatively figuring out a way to take a car and have a different experience and almost kind of build my own elongated press trip, for lack of a better way of saying it, because I can't keep having cars delivered to California because I can't keep telling California stories. It's hard enough just for me telling domestic stories. So I'm actually having a little bit of the opposite experience.
And that's really interesting that you said that, Alexandra, because a lot of times, I mean, you do beyond press drives. So how are you able to cover those experiences or other experiences without being able to travel or go to, different events that aren't happening anymore?
Honestly, that is my day-to-day. I'm talking to all my editors. I mean, I write a lot for, as you guys know, I'm the motoring pages editor for Elite Traveler. I write for Luxury Magazine and Architectural Digest and the New York Times. And the hardest part truly is finding compelling ways to talk about products that I previously had access to in the perfect place. Right? Taking a McLaren in the south of France makes perfect sense. Again, I'm going to use the PCH example. Taking McLaren on PCH is like, okay. And maybe it's because I live here and I'm from here. I know that this is a global destination, whatever, but being the local, it's the gossamer sheet is less sparkly, I suppose. To answer your question, I'm looking more and more at doing road trips. I'm looking more and figuring out how to take cars on the road or driving to a place and getting a car delivered there and then exploring there and tacking on some kind of destination guide. That kind of seems to be the happy medium right now because unlike Ted, we're kind of trapped.
Well, I have the inverse problem. I have access to all the things that you guys want, but all the budget that is used to create events like what you're used to being flown over to has been rerouted to the largest market in the world, which is America. So the reason you all get access to the prime car fleets and there's prime experiences, I literally got my first press invite to the Maserati MC20. That was my first press invite to a car event in Europe all year, except for the Monza, the Roma, which I couldn't make it. So I think a lot of the budget's being put to like, okay, there's one market left that has money to buy our shit. It's America. Let's put it all there, because Europe is really, our streets are open, but I don't think that people are spending as much as they once were.
Yeah, to add on to what Ted said about the cars not being used, Porsche actually let me use a GT4, and we actually drove at 2,500 miles across, I don't even know, 8 or 9 states, because the fact that nobody's driving them. They're not really putting that many miles on them. So we kind of helped them with that, I guess. But it was cool to be able to use a car essentially for 2 weeks for that kind of thing.
Magnus got a 992 turbo like 2 weeks after lockdown. I was like, what the fuck?
Right. and Larry, kind of touching on the event side, you spend most of your time going to and from different motorsports events, car culture events, and I think Ted, you as well. What, honestly, you talked about shooting in LA, but also like kind of what have you been doing to fill that space and sort of fill the void? It seems like now that's picking up with Pikes Peak and things like that.
Yeah, the lockdown. Yeah, the lockdown happened while I was shooting WRC in Mexico, and I think that was pretty much like the last worldwide event. The lockdown started, and everyone basically had to go back to their countries before all the borders were shut down. That was the last normal event for me, and then since then we've been doing events. Like I just came back from Formula Drift in St. Louis, and before that I was at Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak, for example, didn't have any spectators. But of course, with the teams there and the support staff, all of that, there was still a lot of people, so it still felt kind of normal. With Formula Drift, the attendance maybe was about 25% of what is normal. It's starting to come back, and the thing is, it makes me feel so good when I see these race teams, when I see these drivers. They want things to go back to as normal as possible, as soon as possible. They want to race. They don't want to just sit around and do nothing.
Interesting. And for freelancers, photographers, writers, have you Alexander, you kind of talked about this. You're pitching these story ideas to your editors. Has that been more challenging? Have editors been opening up different opportunities, or have they been open to new things?
I think it's kind of really ebbed and flowed. As a freelancer, I have my editorial, but I also media train and I also brand consult. And I think the kind of that trilogy has been really interesting, because when COVID kind of first hit and the lockdown hit, all the media training and brand consulting went away in a heartbeat. And all of my editors just went, people are reading everything more than ever. What do we do? But wait, we don't have budget. But wait, we didn't factor this in. And oh my God, a lot of the publications I write print for, and they're either quarterly or biannual. And they kind of went, oh my God, we have to do this pivot to online, which yes, that's still a conversation that's happening. It's been really curious, because you have the need, but at the same time, you have to curate the content and the stories way more mindfully in terms of what you like. All of the travel stories that I have slated for, I have a desert hunting story, I have the most interesting remote diving in the world story, obviously not car focused, but I can't write those stories right now because I can't go to those places. And if you write them, you're phenomenally tone deaf to what's going on right now. So again, you have to pivot to more, what can I do domestically? What's interesting? Obviously, I write a lot in the luxury sector. What is actual luxury right now? Because wrapping your head around a luxury RV is kind of like, wait, what? But those do exist. And I've seen more, earth roamers on the road than ever. So it's kind of that constant gentle pivot of figuring out what are those experiences that can happen domestically, and kind of redefining what luxury is, at least to Americans, because unless you have a private jet, which even if you do have a private jet, a lot of places won't take you anyways.
Right.
What does that look like? What do those stories look like? And that's the question I am constantly getting asked by editors. What does luxury look like in America?
Right.
And that's a good point when you bring up luxury, especially, and you brought up, you don't want to sound tone deaf. How do you write about, the luxury and lifestyle world during a pandemic? Obviously, you want to, be mindful, of course, of what the entire world is going through.
You have to stop saying strange times. If you write strange times, I lose it. Like in these strange and trying times.
Right.
Everyone has an article
unprecedented.
right now. I'm like, what the hell? I get it. We're all in the same boat.
I got chewed out for riding a motorcycle when the pandemic broke out.
Me too.
Somebody gave me a really hard time, and I was like, how is this how is this hurting anybody? I'm evaluating a motorcycle and putting my butt on a seat and my gloved hand on the grips. Is this really more dangerous than a regular motorcycle ride is? I think, the tone deaf point is really good, because everybody has a different perspective and is coming from someplace different. It turned out that the guy who was chewing me out had COVID, really suffered through it, and just doesn't want to see it spreading. So I understand where people are coming from. But we are also in the business of sharing experiences and talking about these amazing vehicles that we get to experience. So I think it's got to be couched in a way that is at once sensitive, yet also an experience of transport, taking people to a different place, even if it's the same old damn roads that we're so used to now. It's like we're in a unique position to tell the story of these cars and motorcycles that are really exceptional, and they offer something that is an escape from the everyday in most cases. We're lucky in that way, but we have to use a little bit of a different vocabulary now, I think.
Right. And many of you work with, when we're talking about luxury specifically, many of you work with luxury brands or sports car brands that, you know, produce expensive product. Are there brands that have been doing a really good job and a thoughtful job with those launches, and others that maybe have done a bad job? And I'm not asking to call out anybody specifically, but if you want to share some examples of that, or have you seen something that was really, like you mentioned the Ferrari thing, Bassem, were there other examples that you were like, wow, that was really, really clever, or a really interesting way to do that?
I mean, there's only so many ways you can spin it, I think. You know, like Rolls-Royce did a tailgate wine tasting Zoom party. And, you know, I wish I had invested in UPS and FedEx stock, because like people are shipping a lot of stuff, which is great for lazy people who don't want to leave the house now. But, you know, I don't know. I don't know if you can really reinvent the wheel there. Some people are obviously putting more effort into it than others, but I haven't been like, you know, oh wow, that was a really original idea. I mean, somebody else chime in and prove me wrong, but yeah, it's the same.
Honda did a really interesting one, not really in the luxury space, but a few weeks ago they had a drive-in movie at the Rose Bowl, and they leveraged their partnership with the Rose Bowl to actually they delivered the car that day, and we all piled into the car and drove to the Rose Bowl, and then drove down onto the field. And down on the field, we had our own little space and a cooler set up with the snacks that we'd requested, and they brought a pizza over a little bit later. And then they did a movie on the Jumbotron at the Rose Bowl. And that was like just such an interesting experience that felt very much like a normal press trip kind of a thing. But, you know, then, you know, obviously there were a few precautions taken where anytime you were in your little pod on the field, you could have your mask off, but if you were leaving it, you needed to mask up, but still give us a chance to kind of like interact and behave like it was the before times, you know. And there's just a lot of fun and really, really interesting way of kind of pulling people into this like family oriented like fun while still keeping people safe, which I really appreciated. I thought that was really, really clever and an interesting way of handling the situation.
I think there's a tremendous opportunity, honestly, to answer your question, Corey. I think there's a tremendous opportunity. And I think, yes, you can't reinvent the wheel, but you kind of can. I think Ferrari did a great job. What Brett just said about Honda, that sounds amazing. I actually think right when COVID hit, I put in so many press requests to interview people who would normally be traveling in meetings, untouchable. I'm like, you're sitting at home. I'm sitting at home. Why can't I have access to you? And I think right now, there's something similar going on. I don't think enough brands are taking enough advantage to really think creatively. But again, I am experience-based. So unlike, you know, Brett, I can't have a car delivered, spend a week with it and be like, oh my goodness, this is great, unless I come up with an itinerary, unless I come up with a really interesting way to be able to experience the car, because again, I'm more lifestyle focused in how I look at and review cars than just, okay, here's the car, I get, you know, unfettered, a week's worth of unfettered access. It's actually more work on my end to go through and be like, okay, where am I going? Where am I eating? Can I go stay somewhere? Do I want to go stay somewhere? So to have the brands think more critically and creatively, I think it's a bit of a miss.
I'm just so happy that the IGTV live sessions are over, that we've all moved past that.
We've learned how to cook all the breads and everything.
Like the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I was like, wow, this is really great. You know, we're all chatting, catching up. I haven't seen Jeff Zwart in a while. Cool. And I'm like, week 6, I'm like, fucking stop. I can't handle it anymore.
That's an interesting point, Ted, that you brought up, because you're so, I mean, with Instagram, you're so active and you're so wonderful at everything that you're doing. What do you see as the new trend that, you know, companies, and obviously Instagram, like, you know, that TVs, no more of that. What do you see as next?
Well, I could probably also speak for Larry here. During lockdown, we couldn't really work as photographers, and so I was publishing a lot of my backlog of content of stuff that I'd done years prior, and I received so many messages from people that were just so thankful that I wasn't posting a meme about lockdown or posting. They were like, "Thank you for sharing something beautiful. Thank you for sharing something meaningful. Thank you for giving me a moment to kind of like forget that I'm like glued to my lazy boy and just waiting for the world to end. And I don't know if you're if you're somebody who creates beauty or captures beauty like Larry does, or who attempts to like I do, I think it's our obligation is to keep putting quality content forward, and there's no secret sauce, and there's no secret sauce during a pandemic. There's no secret sauce during normal business hours. It's like a good freaking photo is a good freaking photo. And the world has a great need for that. And it gives people and it inspires kids, and it gives people a moment to get out of their head for a second and imagine what it's like to be at a Formula Drift track or to be at Pikes Peak or whatever. So more now than ever, I think we have an obligation to do our best work, because the world really needs a distraction from the endless stream of bad news.
Yeah, to touch on what Ted said, I actually had a conversation with Pete Stout from 000 magazine. I was telling him, like, I didn't realize how not essential we are as photographers until this. But then, we kind of came up with the art is essential, especially with cars. It's, cars are a method of transportation. To make them pretty and make them art, it's kind of an interesting thing. It does inspire people. During this lockdown, we haven't stopped shooting. We just shot personal things. We shot friends' cars. We've done anything and everything we can to keep the YouTube channel that we run going, of course, in a safe way. If it's something where we can't find anything to shoot, or no one's hiring us to shoot, we'll still shoot in a way where we're like, hey, let's take our own cars out. Let's go on a road trip. Let's go off-roading. Let's do this. Anything that's open or anything that we are allowed to do, we did. And a lot of people thanked us for, hey, this is at least you're kind of trying to keep entertainment going while a lot of people can't shoot. A lot of people aren't allowed to shoot. We did our best to continue shooting.
On that note, I've been taking advantage of my better half. And, I've had these cars at home, and I've had a lot to say about them. And I've always had her by my side giving me her thoughts on these cars when I was testing them before. But now I was like, why don't you be in a video with me? And why don't we just talk about these cars? And I've shot a bunch of these videos, actually. And, this kind of like husband-wife chit-chat about the car has been actually a really kind of fun, almost therapeutic way to view a job that can get very kind of mechanical and rote after a while. And using the YouTube platform for that has been kind of refreshing for me, because I'm a total latecomer to the genre, but it's been a blast. And it's surprising the amount of positive comments you can see on YouTube when you just put something out there that's honest. I'm so used to the comments being like a cesspool of like weird, weird vibes, but it's actually been really fun. So that's been an interesting diversion for me.
It's really cool. And we touched on events a little bit before, and I think obviously we seem to all kind of be centered around automotive in this conversation. And so without auto shows happening this year, and I'd say probably in the luxury space too, no Basel World, none of these other events, and a lot of brands making really swift pivots to digital launches. Do you see that as a positive or negative? And have there been some examples that you've seen that really stood out? Like, do we need auto shows? Do we need this event?
They're over, man. It's done. You will not see another auto show in the next 5 years that looks like one from the last 5. Same with watch shows. Same with all these shows. It's over.
Well, in particular to auto shows, we've been straying away from that for years now, where automakers will fly you out a week before the auto show to give you a first look so that they can kind of control the news cycle for 24 hours. So they've been kind of like separating themselves from like those key 3 or 4 press days already for years. I think this is the nail in the coffin that, they'll probably continue to have some relevance to consumers, but for the media, I don't think that we need them anymore. I hate to say it because I really love auto shows, but
they're good fun as mini holidays, but I'd much rather that McLaren spent that $10 million from going to the Geneva Auto Show on research and development or product marketing or something that's actually relevant to developing a better product to make them a better company than flying me business class and putting me in $1,000 a night hotel so I can have a 13 Swiss franc fucking Diet Coke. You know, I don't think that's a good business decision. I think I'm much happier now seeing a private one-on-one meeting with a brand or a digital launch that eventually spills over into a more physical experience. It's much more meaningful. These trade shows it's over. It's a relic of the 80s.
Well, it's like what Michael Eisner always said, I like to put creative people in a financial box and let them work backwards from that. When the money was really free flowing and car companies were flying journalists across the Atlantic in Concords because they could, was that really the best way to build a car? Like, probably not. But having limitations and having to think out of the box probably will yield not only, I think, a better product, hopefully, but a better brand structure where, things are valued differently. And, the contraction of the market too, I'm sure will feed that mentality in a different way, because there's so many forces at play here with the economy and with everything that's happening on a macro level. But, it's really interesting to see how the business is recalibrating from a movement that was already in place. Publishing was already in trouble. Print publishing especially was already struggling. So like you said, the nail in the coffin, what is the next step? And I hope it's a positive one. I think it should be.
Yeah, totally agree. And we're seeing, I think if, let's just use Porsche as an example, we're seeing events like Luftgekühlt, even when they were doing events, all these niche events. So you look at, small events around the Monterey Car Week or other things like that. I think it's going to be more niche events where people are spending time in a smaller group rather than showing up and walking through a convention center to look at the latest Camry or whatever it might be. So
it's much better to make 1,000 people really happy than to underwhelm 10,000 people.
Totally agree.
Generally speaking.
And we know from, our clients and contacts in the industry that, that run other businesses that manufacture luxury goods, or, performance parts, whatever it might be, some are doing really well. Others aren't, but most people are seeing sales go up. Have you heard some of the, especially big ticket items? Everybody and their mother seems to be buying a Peloton right now. So what have you seen from your perspective? Or heard from other brands?
Are you
Roof's customers are, sorry.
No.
I was going to say Roof's customers are COVID insensitive. If you're buying a roof, you're going to be wealthy before, during, and after a pandemic. I'm sorry.
Are you speaking about all luxury goods, or are we just talking?
Not necessarily just luxury goods, but we've had multiple clients come back to us and tell us they've had their record months. They've had the best months in company history and things like that, and not just luxury brands, but product manufacturers that are selling expensive things. Have you heard a lot of that from in the industry or beyond?
I know there's a lot of recreational online car shopping that's happening almost as therapy. It's like a retail therapy on Bring a Trailer or whatever. That's like hitting record levels, as you know. On a personal level, on my little small scale level, anything DIY has just seemed to blow up. I've spent more time and money on my old Land Rover in the last 3 months than ever. And it's running better than it's ever run. And I'm keeping Rovers North and British Atlantic in business with all my parts orders. But
that's just a Land Rover thing. That has nothing to do with
it's not pandemic related at all.
I'm finding, so one of the big pivots I made from obviously travel writing, because not ideal, is kind of the fitness wellness world right now. I have a veritable home gym at this point, because that's what people want to read about. It's kind of DIY / make yourself better. I feel like people are either gaining 20 pounds or losing 20 pounds, depending on if you're drinking or Pelotoning. I'm finding with the majority of brands I'm working with, it's all about creativity, right? It's all about how can you pivot? How can you make this meaningful? How can you sell to a consumer who's eager? Consumers are still eager to consume. They're probably just consuming differently. So rather than people getting on planes or trains and going places, they're now at home. So how can you market the house? How can you market making the house better, making yourself better in a time when all those other distractions and all that other noise isn't possible?
I have a question. Have you guys flown yet since the lockdown? None of you guys?
I've done 20, 30 flights this year.
Yeah. So it's crazy. Some people, I've been flying a lot, pretty much almost every week. And a lot of people have been asking me like, oh, like, what is it like? It's gotta be so crazy. You know, it's like everyone wearing clean suits and stuff. I actually feel like it's safer now because everyone has to wear face masks. Before, when I was traveling, I travel a lot, just like you, Ted. And if you wear a face mask, everyone looks at you weird, right? And it's kind of like it's taboo to wear a face mask if you're not in an Asian country, especially if you're flying. Now, I'm so glad that everyone's wearing a face mask because it's like, it is the germ tube, you know? And now I feel like it's safer than ever, honestly.
That's really interesting insight. And I know some people have been a little bit apprehensive about that, but I see the same thing. And some airlines are taking precautions, trying to do things a little differently. But that's really interesting insight too. Because like we were talking about that yesterday, that you have Japan, South Korea, if somebody's sick or they're not feeling well, they're usually wearing a mask. It's pretty commonplace. But here, it hasn't been. So that's really interesting insight.
I remember I was in Japan in November last year, and I asked my Japanese buddy who was my guide there, and I was like, I feel like an asshole not wearing a mask. Everyone's wearing a mask. He's like, well, yeah, it's, you know, because they're under the weather, so they want to protect you. But it's crazy. That was not even a year ago.
Yeah, I actually shot a whole series in Japan right before the lockdown, and everyone was still wearing a mask. So when the series actually came out, people thought I shot it during the lockdown because everyone wore a mask.
That's really interesting. Any kind of, final thoughts, as this thing stretches on, what have you learned sort of about your craft, throughout this experience, and kind of how have you changed the way you do business, whether it's how you write, shoot, anything like that?
I'll go. Cream rises to the top. If you've got good ideas, if you've got good stories, editors are going to want them, brands are going to want them, they're going to support you. I would say that my perfect example, show not tell, I suppose, is this Land Rover trip I just took. I mean, I was the first US journalist to get a Defender. Land Rover gave me a Velar to drive from California to Utah. They brought me the Defender in Utah. I drove the Defender around Utah for 2 weeks and put it through its absolute paces. Honestly, the only thing they said is, please, when you go to the salt flats, just wash it after. Just really wash it after. But I took a photographer friend of mine and we shot incredible content, incredible experiences. I can't tell you the number of people, both kind of in this community, in my larger travel community, other brands who called me and said, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I had worked with 5 or 6 brands. I mean, I worked with Eddie Bauer. It's their 100-year anniversary. They gave me a whole bunch of support and clothes to take with me to weather test and adventure test. I think if you have good ideas and you execute them kind of as flawlessly or beautifully as possible, Visit Utah was like, oh my God, how can we help? What can we do? Just kind of, again, traversing all those spaces because it's a destination guide. It's a road trip. What are you going to, wear? What are you going to see? How are you going to do it? Everybody kind of rose up and said, oh my God, this is a great opportunity. How can we help? What can we do? And granted, logistically, it was like, I've never balanced so many logistics in my life. But everybody's really excited. My editor's like, when can I see the story? When can I see the story? Everything about it is really exciting. And I think when you have those ideas and you are able to get creative and you've got those relationships, that's how you do it.
Yeah. To touch on that, on the photography side, we have to work pretty much 3 times as hard now just to make the same amount or just to get by, which I don't know how so many other people are doing it. I don't see them shooting. If they're not shooting, that means money's not coming in, so how are they making ends meet? It's like the craziest thing, we're actually way busier now just to stay afloat. And it's the same way, it's the same with race teams, racing drivers, other people in the industry. I talk to them, they say, hey, we are so busy because we have to be. Otherwise, we're going to go bankrupt or whatever. It's pretty crazy to see, what people are doing to keep going.
One thing we did for Type 7, the magazine we do for Porsche during the lockdown, is we tried to start buying or licensing photographers' back catalogs. Not the whole catalogs, but stories that they hadn't published or stuff that was just sort of sitting on the rack. And we ended up maybe 20 or 30 stories we ended up buying from contributors who just hadn't even gotten around to editing the photos or whatever. And we were able to provide a little bit of cash flow. We commissioned much more, I would say, during lockdown than an average month, because on an average month, my team is out there creating as well. So we had to rely, like there was this great story we shot of a beautiful 911T in Amsterdam. And this kid who lives in Amsterdam was like, you know what? I'm post-COVID. I've already had it. I feel safe going in the streets. I'm going to go shoot it. And he shot it.
I saw that story. I love that story.
Yeah. It was an empty Amsterdam, and the photos are amazing. And that story wouldn't have happened otherwise. So we stopped looking at this as a oh fuck, what are we doing? But now it just became immediately, how can we take it? Like every crisis is an opportunity. So what's our opportunity here? And we started commissioning really great stuff from people that were willing or able to work in their environments, because
that set actually inspired me to kind of do something similar in LA. It was a wonderful set, and that can exist during normal times. That's the crazy thing.
Impossible. He was driving through an area that is 100% filled with people 24/7 any other time of the year, and it was remarkable. So yeah, like I said, every crisis is an opportunity. If you sit there feeling like you're in a crisis, you're not looking for the opportunity.
I think Alexandra touched on it pretty well too, that we have access and we have resources at our disposal, but the challenge now is just managing the logistics and making those things happen. That, we have tons of manufacturers are throwing things at us. We're tons of opportunities there, but all of a sudden, like, it becomes, well, should I just let this thing sit in front of my house for a week and I'll take it up Angeles Crest for a day and take some photos, or can I go do something cool with it? And that's kind of been, obviously the stories that are more successful are the ones that have that hook or that angle. And I think she touched on it really well. Just like managing that entire trip from soup to nuts was just pretty impressive and pretty challenging, but it bears itself out with participation and engagement and things like that, for sure.
I mean, on a personal level, I could say, my life before COVID was very glamorous and going to Europe all the time and doing all these great things at these great locations. But being at home and having a face-to-face interaction every day with my family, and being able to bring my wife into these videos and do road trips with my family, and we're planning something at the end of this month to go drive to a press launch that's in Texas, has enabled me to feel a little bit more complete as a human being, which is really kind of an unexpected benefit out of this, because it looks great on Instagram when you're in the south of France and when you're driving in the Alps and doing all these glamorous things. But the fact of the matter is, I really missed my family, and to be able to kind of fold them into my life incrementally here and there, my professional life, in a way that I could have never dreamed of. I mean, it is a challenging time for everybody, and there's a lot that's been difficult for people to deal with. But to be able to bring that positivity to my work has actually been kind of revolutionary for me at least on a personal level. So, everybody's experience is different, and I'm totally sensitive to that, but I've been lucky in that way.
Really cool. I've kind of noticed that too. A lot more people are focusing locally, not so much in your area, but like their sort of local group, their local community, focusing more on kind of what's happening in their world rather than trying to figure everything out around the world. Really just, keeping, staying on track. So that's great.
Absolutely. That's a great way to end too.
Yeah. Awesome. So,
thank you everyone for your time. That was super helpful, especially for Corey and I as publicists. We're like, oh, taking notes.
Yeah, look, doing PR, doing PR in this. I mean, obviously we do more than just kind of sending out press releases, but figuring out, we're doing press loans, we're doing all these different things,
What you guys
finding out
need.
different ways to make it work, and we couldn't do it without people, on the other end also being really creative with how they, attack something, whether it's a photo shoot or an article or a trip or whatever. We're just trying to be, accommodating and make it happen. So thank you, everybody. It was awesome having you on here, and really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having us.
Cool.
Pleasure.
Have a great one, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Talk soon.
Yeah.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.